The morning sun baked the wide concrete runways of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The air shimmered with heat and jet fumes, a mix of sweat, sand, and steel. Soldiers moved in formation, their boots hitting the ground in rhythm. Among them, one figure walked with measured confidence, Captain Emily Carter, newly transferred to the base after 3 years overseas. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture unshakable, her expression unreadable. Beneath that calm surface, however, Emily was acutely aware of the whispers that followed her across the base yard. She'd heard it all before, the murmurs, the skepticism, the disbelief that someone like her could lead a combat unit. "Is that the new instructor?" one private muttered as she passed. "Yeah, the one who served in Kandahar," another replied. "They say she took down 2 insurgents barehanded." "Yeah, but let's see if she can handle Colonel Hayes. He eats officers alive." Emily didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than rumors, bullets, explosions, betrayal. Words didn't scare her. But as she neared the main command building, she felt an unsettling tightness in her chest. The new base wasn't just another assignment. It was a test of everything she stood for. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, and the sterile scent of military polish filled the hallway. She checked in at the front desk. "Captain Carter reporting for duty," she said firmly. The sergeant behind the counter nodded, but didn't hide his curiosity. "Colonel Hayes has been expecting you, Mom." Emily gave a polite nod and made her way down the hall. Colonel Richard Hayes was a man whose reputation preceded him, a towering figure with decades in the field, known for his old-school discipline and his intolerance for what he called the modern softness of command. He'd been in the army long, enough to remember a time when orders weren't questioned, and respect was demanded, not earned. When Emily entered his office, Hayes barely looked up. "Captain Carter," he said flatly, flipping through her file. "So, you're the one they're sending to train my men?" "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice carried no arrogance, just composure. He smirked. "You've got quite a record here. Afghanistan, Iraq, commendations for valor. Impressive on paper. Thank you, sir." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "But we both know papers don't tell the whole story. Around here, respect isn't given by rank. It's earned in the field. And these boys aren't used to taking orders from." He paused, his gaze sharp. "Someone like you." Emily knew exactly what he meant. "Understood, sir," she said evenly. "I've earned respect before. I'll do it again." Hayes' smirk faded for a split second. Something in her tone, not defiance, but certainty, rubbed him the wrong way. He gestured dismissively toward the door. "You start with Alpha Company tomorrow at 0600. Don't be late." "I never aim," Emily replied. She saluted sharply and turned to leave. As the door closed behind her, Hayes muttered under his breath, "We'll see how long that attitude lasts." Out on the training field, Emily met her new unit, a mix of veterans and rookies. Their eyes followed her every move as she introduced herself. "Good morning," she began. "I'm Captain Carter. I'm here to make sure each of you operates at peak efficiency. I don't care where you're from or what you've heard about me. Out here, skill and teamwork matter more than anything." A few smirked. One soldier, a tall corporal, crossed his arms. "Ma'am, with respect, we've been trained by the best already." Emily smiled slightly. "Then this should be easy for you." She stepped onto the field, picked up a rifle, and began demonstrating tactical drills, smooth, efficient, flawless. Within minutes, as skepticism began to fade, she corrected stances, adjusted grips, and offered tips that only someone who'd truly seen combat could know. By the end of the session, even the corporal who doubted her nodded in quiet respect. But Hayes, watching from the sidelines, didn't like what he saw. From his office window, he saw his men listening to her, laughing even, something they rarely did under his command. She had a way of connecting without commanding, of leading without shouting. And that, to Hayes, was dangerous. That night, in the officers' mess, he made his opinion known. Carter's got them wrapped around her finger already, he grumbled to Major Brooks. I give her a month before the cracks show. Brooks hesitated. Sir, with respect, she's got a solid record. Maybe give her a chance. Hayes snorted. Chance? I've been in this army longer than she's been alive. I know the type. Comes in thinking she's got something to prove. Let's see how she handles real pressure. Over the next few days, Emily continued to work quietly, winning over her soldiers through skill, not talk. She never raised her voice, never boasted, but her discipline spoke louder than any speech. At the same time, subtle obstacles began appearing. Incomplete supply requests, rescheduled training sessions, accidental double bookings. It didn't take long for her to realize who was behind it. Hayes wasn't just watching. He was testing her patience. One evening, as she reviewed logistics in her office, Sergeant Vega, one of her most dependable subordinates, knocked on the door. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Go ahead, Emily said. Word is the colonel's trying to get you to slip up. He's been on edge ever since you arrived. Emily sighed quietly. Let him test me. I'm not here to compete. I'm here to serve. Vega nodded, admiring her calm. Still, ma'am. Watch your back. He's not the forgiving kind. When he left, Emily sat alone, staring at the map spread across her desk. She'd fought through war zones, insurgencies, and fear itself. But this was a different kind of battlefield. Politics, ego, power. It wasn't about who was right. It was about who could outlast the pressure. The tension came to a subtle head one afternoon during a leadership briefing. Hayes interrupted her mid-sentence. Captain Carter, maybe you should let those with real command experience handle this discussion, he said with a smirk. Emily didn't flinch. With respect, sir, I'm briefing on field readiness, and that's my responsibility. The room went quiet. Several officers exchanged glances. Hayes leaned forward, his smile tight. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said, voice low. But don't mistake confidence for authority. I wouldn't, sir, Emily replied calmly. Authority is something I've already earned. A few of the younger officers looked down, hiding smiles. Hayes' face reddened slightly. Meeting adjourned, he snapped. As Emily walked out, she could feel the shift in the air. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't insulted anyone, yet somehow she had won a silent victory. Hayes' pride had taken the first hit. That night, standing on the balcony of her barracks, Emily looked out at the base, the barracks lights flickering like distant stars. She thought of her father, a Marine who'd taught her that leadership wasn't about fear, but fairness. Earn respect quietly, he used to say. The loud ones usually have the least to say. She smiled faintly, the memory warming her for a moment before the chill of reality returned. She wasn't naive. She could feel the hostility brewing beneath the surface, the quiet resentment from Hayes' circle. But she had something none of them did, unshakable focus. Whatever came next, she was ready. The next morning, as the base awoke to the sound of distant artillery drills, Colonel Hayes stood watching from the upper balcony. His eyes followed Emily as she led her platoon across the field. Her commands were crisp, her timing flawless, her men perfectly in sync. He clenched his jaw. This isn't over, he muttered to himself. Not by a long shot. And somewhere below, unaware of just how deep this conflict would go, Emily Carter trained her soldiers. Every move, every breath, preparing. Not only for war, but for the battle of respect that was only just beginning. The week rolled on, heavy with heat and tension. At Fort Bragg, Nothing went unnoticed. Every rumor, every glance, every power shift rippled through the ranks like wind through dry grass. And lately, that wind carried one name more than any other, Captain Emily Carter. She had become the quiet heartbeat of the base. Every morning, she arrived on the training field before sunrise. Her soldiers, men who had once doubted her, now followed her commands with a mix of respect and curiosity. She never shouted. She didn't need to. Her presence commanded attention. Still, not everyone was impressed. Colonel Richard Hayes watched her from a distance, arms folded, eyes cold. Each time she succeeded, it bruised his pride a little more. He was a man of the old guard, one who believed leadership was measured by fear, not fairness. But Emily? She led differently. Her authority was quiet, earned, unshakable, and that terrified him more than any open defiance. One humid afternoon, the tension finally began to crack. Emily stood in front of her platoon, sweat dripping from her brow as she observed the final stage of an obstacle drill. Soldiers lunged through mud, scaled walls, and crawled under barbed wire. Her voice was clear and steady. "Remember," she called out, "fatigue exposes weakness. Don't let it control your mind. Control it." The soldiers obeyed, pushing through exhaustion, their movements sharp. When the drill ended, she nodded approvingly. "Better. Much better," she said. "Hydrate and debrief in 10. Corporal Briggs, one of the more outspoken men in our unit, approached, catching his breath. "Ma'am," he said, panting, "permission to say something off the record?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. You run us harder than any commander I've served under, but you never yell, never lose your cool. How do you do it?" She smiled faintly. "Discipline isn't about volume, Corporal. It's about consistency." Briggs chuckled. "Guess that's why even the colonel can't rattle you." Her expression hardened slightly. "Stay focused on training, Briggs." But deep down, she knew he was right. Hayes was trying. Every day. That evening, Emily entered the mess hall. Conversation stopped for a moment, not from hostility, but from awareness. She grabbed a tray, sat alone, and quietly reviewed tomorrow's schedule. Across the room, Colonel Hayes sat surrounded by his senior officers. Laughter erupted occasionally, but Emily noticed how their glances flicked toward her table, again and again. Major Brooks leaned toward Hayes. "She's making progress, sir. The men are performing better under her training." Hayes' expression darkened. "They're supposed to perform better under mine." "Still, sir, morale's up." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Hayes snapped. He slammed his fork down and rose abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. The room fell silent. Emily didn't look up, but she could feel the tension move toward her, like a storm front. Hayes stopped at her table. "Captain Carter," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "I've reviewed your latest report. Seems you've decided to modify training protocols without consulting me." Emily placed her fork down gently. "Sir, the adjustments were within standard parameters, meant to improve response time and reduce injury risk." "Within parameters?" he barked. "You don't get to decide what's within parameters without clearance from me." "Respectfully, sir," she replied evenly, "the results speak for themselves. Injury rates are down 30% this week." A few soldiers looked away to hide their smirks. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Captain," he said through gritted teeth, "a soldier's job isn't to think, it's to follow orders." Emily held his gaze, her voice calm. "I don't train soldiers to follow blindly, sir. I train them to survive." For a long, tense moment, no one breathed. Then Hayes gave a stiff nod. "Enjoy your meal, Captain," he said sharply. "We'll be discussing this further." He turned and walked out, but everyone in the room knew it wasn't over. That night, Emily's office phone rang. It was Sergeant Vega. "Ma'am, you might want to see this," he said quietly. "Orders just came down from the colonel's office. He's scheduled a field evaluation tomorrow, and he's calling it a combat readiness challenge." Sounds personal. Emily closed her eyes briefly, exhaling. She'd seen this tactic before. Bait. A public test meant to humiliate her. "Still," she said calmly. "Understood, Sergeant. Make sure the team's prepared. We'll be ready." "Yes, ma'am," Viga said, his tone mixed with admiration and concern. After hanging up, Emily stared out the window. The base was silent, except for the distant hum of generators. Somewhere in the darkness, she could almost feel Hayes' eyes on her, waiting for her to fail. She picked up the photo of her father that sat on her desk, a stern man in uniform, his arm around a young Emily. He died when she was 19, but his words still guided her. "Never fight from pride, Emily. Fight for purpose. Pride burns out fast. Purpose lasts." She whispered quietly, "You were right, Dad, and I'll prove it." The next morning dawned hot and unforgiving. The entire battalion gathered at the training field for the colonel's Combat Readiness Challenge. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew this wasn't just a drill. It was a showdown. Hayes stood in front of the formation, his uniform crisp, his expression hard. "Today," he announced, "we'll see if Captain Carter's methods produce results, or if her reputation's just smoke and mirrors." Emily stood silently beside him, hands behind her back. The challenge began. One by one, soldiers tackled the course, sprinting through mud, scaling walls, diving into trenches. Emily's team moved like a well-oiled machine, precise, fast, efficient. She called out instructions, her voice steady amid chaos. By the time it was over, her unit had broken 3 base records. The field erupted in cheers. Hayes' face twisted into a forced smile. "Well done, Captain," he said tightly. "You've managed to make my men look like yours." "With respect, sir," Emily replied. "I thought they were our men." The crowd went dead silent. A single spark of defiance, polite but firm, had just lit a fire Hayes couldn't ignore. Hours later, Emily was summoned to his office. The door slammed behind her. "Sit," Hayes ordered. "I prefer to stand, sir," she said. His jaw twitched. "You embarrassed me today." "I did my job, sir." "You undermined my authority in front of every officer on this base." "With respect, I only demonstrated leadership." "If that undermined you, perhaps—" "Don't," he cut in sharply, stepping closer. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot with anger. "You think your medals make you untouchable? You think these men respect you because you smile and play nice?" "I think they respect competence," Emily said quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt electric, charged with unspoken fury. Then, without another word, Hayes turned away, gripping his desk until his knuckles whitened. "This isn't over, Captain," he said finally. "Not by a long shot." Emily gave a crisp salute. "Understood, sir." She left the room without looking back. But as she stepped into the hallway, her pulse finally betrayed her composure, pounding hard and fast. That night, she walked alone along the edge of the base, a sound of cicadas filling the darkness. The weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders. She knew men like Hayes. They didn't give up when challenged. They doubled down. Still, she wouldn't change who she was. Every decision she made came from experience, not ego. Every command came from care, not control. And that difference, she realized, was what truly frightened Hayes. He wanted dominance. She embodied respect. And in the military world he'd built, those two things could never coexist. As the moon rose over the silent base, Emily squared her shoulders. She could feel the next confrontation forming, like the static before a lightning strike. But she wasn't afraid of storms. She'd lived through far worse. The air was thick with tension at Fort Bragg. Even the wind seemed to hesitate as it swept across the training fields. Everyone could sense it. The silent war between Colonel Richard Hayes and Captain Emily Carter was nearing a breaking point. Emily had been at the base for less than 2 months, and already she had earned more respect from the men than Hayes had in years. Her platoon was sharper, faster, and more unified than ever. They trained hard, followed her lead, and even other units were beginning to take note. To most, Emily's success was inspiring. To Hayes, it was intolerable. He watched from his office window as her soldiers ran drills in perfect rhythm. It should have made him proud, but all he felt was a burning resentment. Every order she gave, every cheer from the men, was a reminder that his control was slipping away. That evening, Hayes called an emergency officers' meeting. The men gathered in the conference room, exchanging wary glances. "Gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation, "it seems Captain Carter has become something of a celebrity around here." No one spoke. He continued, pacing slowly. "Now, I don't like untested leadership getting undue praise. We're soldiers, not a fan club. And I intend to make sure her so-called methods hold up under real pressure." Major Brooks cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, with respect, Captain Carter's results speak for themselves. Her team's performance." Hayes slammed his palm against the table. "Results aren't the issue, Major. Control is. And it's time we remind everyone who commands this base." The room went silent. Hayes leaned forward, his tone calm but venomous. "Tomorrow, I'm organizing a live combat demonstration, a challenge if you will. Carter and her unit will be put to the test right here, in front of every officer and trainee. Let's see if she's as composed under real scrutiny." Brooks hesitated. "Sir, that's unorthodox." Hayes smiled thinly. "So is her attitude." The next morning, the entire base buzzed with curiosity. Soldiers gathered near the main training ground, whispers cutting through the humid air. "What's this about?" "Heard the colonel's putting Captain Carter through some kind of test. She'll crush it." "You'll see." "Yeah, but if she doesn't?" "It's over for her." Emily stood on the field, calm but alert. Her instincts told her this wasn't just a routine drill. It was a setup. "Captain," Hayes said, approaching with his hands clasped behind his back, "you've been commended for your training results. Impressive numbers. But numbers don't mean much in real combat, do they?" Emily's eyes stayed steady. "No, sir. Combat reveals truth." He smiled. "Exactly. So let's see some truth today." He gestured toward a group of soldiers already lined up. "You'll lead a simulated capture and defend exercise. You have 15 minutes to prepare your team. If you succeed, I'll consider your methods validated. If not," he let the silence do the rest. Emily nodded once. "Understood, sir." She gathered her squad quickly. The men looked uneasy. "Ma'am," said Sergeant Vega, "this isn't a standard test. He's changed the rules. There's extra opposition, and I think he's stacked it against us." Emily's tone was calm, but firm. "Then we adapt. That's what soldiers do." "But ma'am, if we fail," she cut him off gently. "Then we fail with integrity." "But we're not going to fail." In her mind, she laid out the strategy. Quick flanks, diversion tactics, controlled movement. She wasn't going to play his game. She was going to play hers. When the horn sounded, chaos erupted. Gunfire blanks popped, smoke filled the air, and soldiers charged through trenches and barricades. Emily moved with precision, issuing short, clear commands. "Bravo team, left flank. Charlie, cover fire." Under her leadership, her unit moved like a living machine, flowing, adapting, anticipating. Hayes watched from the observation platform, his expression frozen. Within 20 minutes, Emily's team had achieved complete control of the field. The watching soldiers broke into cheers. Even officers began clapping. Hayes' smile never reached his eyes. "Outstanding performance, Captain," he said into the mic. "But let's see how you do personally." Emily turned, surprised. "Sir?" He motioned toward the sparring mat. "Hand-to-hand demonstration. You're a combat instructor, are you not? Show us how it's done." The crowd murmured. Everyone knew this wasn't standard. "Pick your opponent," Hayes said. "Anyone." Emily hesitated, sensing the trap. "With respect, sir, this wasn't." "That's an order, Captain," Hayes interrupted sharply. After a pause, she nodded. "Yes, sir." She looked over the line of soldiers and pointed. "Corporal Briggs." Briggs stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, are you sure?" She gave a small nod. "Let's give them a good show." The two squared off. Hayes watched with crossed arms, his smirk barely concealed. "Begin," he barked. Briggs lunged first, fast but predictable. Emily sidestepped, using his momentum to bring him down smoothly. She didn't hurt him, just demonstrated perfect control. "Again," Hayes ordered. This time, Briggs came harder. She parried, countered, and in a blur, had him on the mat again. Cheers erupted. Even some of Hayes' officers couldn't hide their admiration. Emily stepped back, helping Briggs up, offering a respectful nod. But Hayes' face was red. What was meant to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly. After the crowd dispersed, Hayes summoned her to his office. The air inside was thick with suppressed fury. "You made me look like a fool out there," he said coldly. "That was never my intention, sir," Emily replied. "I simply followed orders. You think you're clever? You think you're better than me, because the men cheer for you?" Emily kept her tone professional. "I don't compete for approval, sir. I just lead." Hayes slammed his fist against the desk. "Don't you patronize me?" he shouted. Emily didn't move. "With respect, sir, I've done nothing but serve to the best of my ability. If that offends you, perhaps it's not me you're angry at." For a moment, Hayes just stared at her, breathing hard, jaw clenched. Then, in a low, dangerous voice, he said, "You might have impressed these boys, but don't forget, this is my base. My rules." Emily held his gaze. "And I follow them, sir. Always?" He leaned closer. "Careful, Captain. I can end your career with a single report. And I can ruin my honor with a single lie," she replied quietly. That was the moment something inside him snapped. Later that evening, the storm outside matched the one inside Hayes' mind. Lightning flashed through his office window as he replayed the day's events. Her steady eyes, her calm voice, the applause that wasn't his. He poured himself a drink, staring into the amber glass. The more he drank, the hotter his anger burned. How dare she embarrass him? How dare she make him feel small on his own base? When the knock came at his door, he was already halfway through his second glass. "Enter," he barked. It was Emily. "Sir, you requested my presence?" "Yes," he said, voice thick with contempt. "Close the door." She obeyed, standing at attention. "What's this about, sir?" He moved closer, his expression twisted. "About respect, Captain. You think you've earned it? You've undermined me in front of my men. You've turned them against their commander." "That's not true, sir," she said steadily. "They respect you. They pity me." He roared, stepping even closer. "Because of you." Emily stood her ground. "Sir, if you continue this behavior, I'll be forced to. Don't you dare lecture me." Hayes shouted. He slammed his glass down, shattering it on the floor. "You'll learn who's in charge here, Carter." He raised his hand, Open, swift, ready to strike. Time slowed. Emily's eyes widened. Her training kicked in. Pure reflex, not thought, not anger. Her arm shot up to block. Her hand caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting with practiced precision. The moment hadn't fully arrived yet, the moment that would change everything. But in that frozen instant, Emily knew. There was no going back now. What came next would echo through the entire base. And it would shock everyone. The glass shards still glimmered across the colonel's office floor like pieces of a shattered ego. The rain outside pounded against the window, and lightning illuminated the tension between the two figures frozen in the middle of the room. Colonel Richard Hayes's hand was raised in midair, his face red with fury, breath sharp and uneven. Captain Emily Carter stood still, her posture tight but composed, eyes locked on his. "Put your hand down, sir," she said, her voice low and steady. But Hayes didn't. His anger was no longer controllable. It had transformed into something primal. The humiliation of that morning's demonstration had cracked his authority, and now he was about to take back control the only way his pride knew how. Force. "Don't tell me what to do," he growled, his voice barely human. "You forget who you're talking to." Then he moved, a sudden, aggressive swing aimed at her face. What happened next unfolded in less than a second. Emily's instincts took over, sharpened by years of combat training and split-second decisions. She didn't think, she reacted. Her left arm came up, intercepting his strike with a sharp block. Her right hand gripped his wrist, twisting it outward and downward in a defensive maneuver meant to neutralize the threat without harm. But Hayes wasn't a cooperative opponent. He resisted, pulling back violently. His strength met her precision, and in that instant, the balance shifted. There was a crack, a sharp, unmistakable sound that cut through the storm outside. Hayes gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. His arm bent at an unnatural angle. The glass of bourbon slipped from his other hand and crashed to the floor. For a second, the world went silent. Emily froze, still holding his arm. "Sir?" she started, her voice trembling. He staggered back, clutching his forearm. You broke it," he shouted, his voice a mix of pain and disbelief. "I didn't mean you were about to hit me. You attacked me." Hayes screamed, stumbling toward his desk, his face pale. "You'll pay for this, Captain. Do you hear me? You'll pay." Emily backed away, heart racing. Her training had always emphasized control, restraint, discipline. But what could she have done? He'd tried to strike her. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "Sir, you assaulted an officer." "I defended myself." "We need medical assistance immediately." Hayes's eyes burned with humiliation. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" He reached for the phone with his uninjured hand, fumbling. "Security!" he barked. "Get to my office now." Emily stood silent, her hands trembling slightly, though she kept them at her sides. Two soldiers burst through the door moments later, their faces shocked at the scene. The broken glass, the overturned chair, the colonel clutching his arm in agony. "Colonel Hayes, sir, what happened?" one of them asked. "She attacked me," Hayes yelled, his voice hoarse. "This woman assaulted her commanding officer." Emily's jaw tightened. "That's not true," she said clearly. "The colonel tried to strike me. I defended myself." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. They'd seen how the colonel had treated her before. They'd heard the whispers. But this was beyond anything they'd imagined. "Get her out," Hayes barked. "Now." They escorted Emily down the hall. She didn't resist. Her face was calm, but her mind was a storm. Every step echoed through the corridor like a drumbeat of disbelief. The base had gone quiet. Word spread fast. something had happened in the colonel's office. By the time she reached the holding room, people were already whispering. "Did you hear?" Carter broke his arm. "No way." "She did. Snapped it clean." "What did he do?" "I don't know, man. But she's in trouble." Hours passed. The storm outside finally began to fade, but the one inside Fort Bragg had only just begun. Major Brooks arrived first, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Emily," he said softly as he entered the small room where she was being held, "what the hell happened?" She looked up, her eyes tired but unwavering. "He tried to slap me." Brooks blinked, stunned. "The colonel?" "Yes, I blocked his attack." His arm broke during the motion. Brooks sat down slowly, rubbing his temples. "You realize how bad this looks, right?" "I know," she said quietly. "But I won't lie about it." He exhaled heavily. "There'll be an inquiry. Maybe a court-martial. The brass won't take this lightly, no matter what the truth is." Emily nodded. "I'm aware, sir." Brooks studied her. "You could have just stepped away." She looked him in the eyes. "And if I had, he'd think it was acceptable to hit another officer. Or worse, one of my soldiers." Brooks didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Hayes lay in a hospital bed, his arm bandaged and secured. The medic had confirmed it, a clean radial fracture. Painful, but not permanent. But his pride? That was shattered beyond repair. General Marks, the base commander, stood beside his bed, listening to the colonel's furious retelling. "She attacked me, General." "Out of nowhere." Hayes insisted. "I was discussing her conduct, and she just snapped." Marks frowned. "You're saying Captain Carter, one of your finest officers, assaulted you without provocation?" "Yes," Hayes barked. "She's insubordinate, arrogant." Marks cut him off. "And why were you meeting her in private after duty hours?" Hayes hesitated. "I needed to address her behavior directly." Mark's expression hardened. "You've been warned before about your temper, Colonel." "There are reports, rumors," Hayes interrupted. "Lies spread by those who envy me." The general looked unconvinced. "We'll let the investigation determine that." By morning, Emily was officially suspended pending inquiry. Her rank was frozen and her access restricted. Her fellow soldiers were devastated. Sergeant Vega, loyal and fiery, visited her quarters before she was escorted off base. "This is bull," he muttered. "Everyone knows what he's like." "Careful, Sergeant," she said softly. "Don't let this ruin your career too." "But ma'am," she smiled faintly. "Do your duty. That's what matters. The truth will surface." But deep down, Emily wasn't sure if truth alone would be enough. The military was a machine, one that valued order over justice, hierarchy over humanity. And she had just broken one of its unwritten laws: never humiliate your superior. As she sat in her temporary quarters that night, she replayed the moment again and again in her mind. The raised hand, the sound of the crack, his face twisting in pain. She hadn't meant to hurt him. She'd only defended herself. Yet somehow, she knew she'd crossed a line that no one ever dared cross. Outside, dawn broke over Fort Bragg, quiet, almost peaceful. But inside the base, whispers spread like wildfire. Some called her reckless. Others called her brave. To her soldiers, she was a symbol, a woman who refused to bow to tyranny. To the officers, she was a threat, proof that courage could defy authority. And to Hayes, lying in his hospital bed, she was the ghost of his humiliation, the living reminder of his downfall. But Emily Carter was not broken. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something larger. The truth was about to be tested, not on the battlefield, but in a courtroom where power, politics, and pride would clash. And as she stared out at the rising sun, her voice was calm when she whispered to herself, "Let them come. I didn't start this war, but I'll finish it." The storm that had started in Colonel Hayes's office now rumbled quietly through the corridors of Fort Bragg. Days had passed, but the tension hadn't eased. It had only deepened. Whispers followed Captain Emily Carter wherever her name was spoken. Some whispered with admiration. She stood up to him. Finally, someone did. Others whispered with fear. She's done. No one wins against a colonel. Even those who didn't know her had an opinion. Her story had become a legend and a warning. The morning the investigation began, Emily sat in a sterile white room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps beneath your skin and tests your composure. Across from her sat Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the appointed investigator, sharp eyes, calm voice, a woman known for her precision and fairness. "Captain Carter," Mitchell began, opening a folder thick with reports. "You understand the seriousness of this inquiry?" "Yes, ma'am," Emily said. "You're accused of assaulting your commanding officer, Colonel Richard Hayes, resulting in a radial fracture. You claimed self-defense. Correct?" "Correct, ma'am." Mitchell leaned back, studying her carefully. "I've interviewed the guards, the medics, and the colonel himself. His account differs." "I'm sure it does," Emily replied evenly. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "He claims you attacked him during a disciplinary discussion." Emily didn't flinch. "He was intoxicated. He attempted to strike me. I blocked the attack. That's when his arm broke." Mitchell's pen stopped moving. "Are you suggesting the colonel was drunk on duty?" "I'm stating what I saw, ma'am." The lieutenant colonel closed the file slowly. "You realize that's a dangerous accusation?" "Yes, ma'am. But it's the truth." For a long moment, the 2 women just looked at each other. There was no hatred in Mitchell's gaze, just calculation, the kind of evaluation that measured both truth and survival. "Finally," she said quietly, "there are rules in the Army, Captain. And then there's the system. The system protects rank, not people." Emily nodded. "I know. But rank doesn't make someone right." Mitchell sighed. "We'll see what the evidence says." Meanwhile, in the hospital ward, Colonel Hayes sat propped up on his bed, his arm still in a sling. He had visitors, his allies. Major Phillips, his longtime friend, stood by the window, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. "So she's sticking with the self-defense story?" Hayes scowled. "Of course she is. The woman's a liar, a manipulator. She planned this." Phillips smirked. "Planned what? You're saying she wanted to break your arm?" "Yes, she's been undermining me from the start, turning my men against me, making me look weak. Well, she's going to regret this." Phillips shrugged. "You've got the stars on your side. A captain can't beat a colonel in a courtroom." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "She won't even make it that far. I'll see to it she's dishonorably discharged before trial." He smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile that reeked of pride. But what he didn't realize was that even as he spoke, his words were being overheard. Outside his room, a young nurse, Private Lisa Torres, stood frozen, her eyes wide. She'd seen the colonel that night. She'd brought him his medication hours before the confrontation, and she'd seen the bourbon glass on his desk. She bit her lip, torn between fear and conscience. That night, Emily sat alone in her quarters. The rain had returned, soft and steady against the window. Her uniform hung neatly beside her bed, her medals shining faintly under the dim lamp. She looked at them, each one representing courage, honor, sacrifice, and felt a quiet ache in her chest. She wasn't afraid of losing her career. She was afraid of losing her truth. The door knocked softly. "Come in," she said. It was Sergeant Vega, carrying a folder. "Ma'am," he whispered, closing the door behind him. "You need to see this." He laid the folder on the table. Inside were testimonies, informal notes from soldiers who had witnessed the colonel's temper before. Threats, insults, intimidation. Emily looked up. "Where did you get these?" "People came to me. They're scared to go official, but they wanted you to have their statements." Emily read through them, one after another. Handwritten accounts from enlisted soldiers describing verbal abuse, favoritism, and even a few drunken outbursts. It was evidence, but unofficial. If she used it, they'd all be at risk. She closed the folder gently. "Thank you, Sergeant. But I can't involve them. Not yet." Vega frowned. "Ma'am, if you don't fight dirty, they will." Emily smiled sadly. "Then I'll fight clean and harder." The next day, the preliminary hearing began in a modest conference hall converted into a military courtroom. A panel of officers sat at the front. Hayes entered first, arm in a sling, walking with forced confidence. Emily entered second, her uniform immaculate, her expression calm. The room buzzed with murmurs as they faced each other for the first time since the incident. When the proceedings began, Hayes spoke first. His testimony was smooth, rehearsed, the perfect image of a wronged superior. "She lost her temper," he said. "When I questioned her leadership approach, she became defensive. Before I knew it, she had my arm twisted and broken. It was unprovoked, violent, and completely unacceptable." He looked at the panel, feigning pain. "I've served this country for 30 years. Never have I seen such blatant insubordination." Then it was Emily's turn. She stood, hands clasped behind her back. "With respect, that's not what happened. The colonel attempted to strike me. I defended myself." Gasps rippled through the room. One of the judges leaned forward. "You're accusing a superior officer of physical assault?" "Yes, sir." "I am." She went on to describe the events calmly, every detail precise, the smell of alcohol, the shattered glass, the threat in his voice. Hayes interrupted angrily. "Lies! She's making this up." The judge banged the gavel. "Colonel, you'll have your turn." Emily didn't flinch. "I didn't break his arm out of anger. I did it out of instinct. I've spent my life protecting people, including the very soldiers he commands." After the session, the tension was unbearable. Reporters weren't allowed, but rumors spread beyond the base. The Army had a scandal now, a decorated female officer accused of assaulting her superior. Late that evening, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell knocked on Emily's temporary quarters again. "I spoke with the hospital staff," she said quietly. "There's someone willing to talk, off record." Emily's eyes widened. "Who?" Mitchell hesitated. "A nurse. Private Lessa Torres. She says she saw Hayes drinking that night." Emily exhaled slowly. "That changes everything." Mitchell nodded. "It could, if she testifies. But she's scared. Hayes's connections run deep." Emily's gaze hardened. "Then I'll protect her. No one else should get hurt for telling the truth." The next day, Mitchell arranged a private meeting with Torres. The young nurse sat nervously, hands shaking. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He'll find out." Emily leaned forward gently. "No one will hurt you, Lisa. You're doing the right thing." Tears welled in the nurse's eyes. "I saw him. He was drinking, angry. Said something about teaching you respect. Then I left. 10 minutes later, I heard shouting." Mitchell recorded every word carefully. It wasn't just evidence. It was proof. That evening, Hayes was informed the investigation had taken a new turn. His face darkened when he learned about the nurse's testimony. "Lies," he roared. "They're framing me. But deep down, for the first time, he felt something colder than anger. Fear. Because this time, he wasn't the hunter. He was the hunted. Outside, Emily stood on the base balcony, watching the American flag ripple under the evening sky. The sun was setting orange and gold against the horizon. She knew the fight wasn't over. The inquiry would continue. The trial would come. The truth would face the weight of politics. But for the first time since that night, she felt something like hope. Because now, she wasn't fighting alone. And the system that once silenced her had started to listen. The courtroom at Fort Bragg was packed. Officers, soldiers, clerks, even civilians with clearance badges. Every seat was taken, every eye fixed on the front of the room. The tension was electric. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was the trial, the official military court-martial of Captain Emily Carter. At one table sat Emily, calm and resolute, her lawyer beside her. Major Alan Reed, a sharp, soft-spoken attorney known for turning impossible cases around. Across the aisle, Colonel Richard Hayes sat with his legal counsel, his arm still bound in a sling. His eyes never left Emily. They burned with pride, hate, and a shadow of fear. The presiding judge, Brigadier General Harold Monroe, adjusted his glasses. "We are convened to determine the facts surrounding the alleged assault of Colonel Richard Hayes by Captain Emily Carter," he said. "Both parties will be heard in full." He nodded toward Hayes's counsel. "You may proceed." The prosecution began confidently. They painted Hayes as a seasoned leader, a man with decades of service, unfairly attacked by a subordinate who could not handle authority. "She has a history of challenging orders," the prosecutor said, pacing before the panel. This was not self-defense. This was defiance. A deliberate act of aggression against her superior. Hayes nodded solemnly as the prosecutor spoke, occasionally glancing at the jury, every motion carefully rehearsed. When it was Emily's turn, her lawyer stood slowly. "Captain Carter is guilty of one thing, doing what any trained soldier would do when threatened with physical harm." She defended herself. He looked at the jury directly. "This isn't about rank. It's about truth." The first witnesses were called, 2 security guards who had entered the office after the altercation. "Did you see Captain Carter strike the colonel?" Reed asked. "No, sir," one replied. "When we arrived, the colonel was injured, and Captain Carter was standing away from him." "Did she resist arrest?" "No, sir. She was calm, cooperative." The prosecution tried to twist their testimony, implying she had already inflicted the damage before they arrived, but the guard's tone remained steady. "She didn't look violent," one said quietly. "She looked shocked." Then came the medical examiner. "The fracture in the colonel's arm is consistent with a defensive block," he explained. "The angle of the break indicates resistance rather than a strike." Murmurs filled the room. Even the judge's expression shifted slightly. Hayes clenched his jaw. Finally, it was Emily's turn to take the stand. She walked up calmly, every step echoing. "Captain Carter," her lawyer said gently, "tell the court what happened that night." She took a deep breath. "The colonel called me to his office after hours. I thought it was about training results. When I arrived, he was drinking. He began accusing me of undermining him. I tried to stay professional, but he became angry." She paused, her voice firm but quiet. "Then he tried to strike me. I blocked his attack. That's when his arm broke." The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Objection, speculation." The judge motioned for restraint. "She may continue." Emily looked at Hayes directly. "I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop." The courtroom was silent. When she stepped down, the prosecution called Hayes himself. He rose slowly, his expression pained, playing the role of a wounded hero. "Colonel, His lawyer began. What happened that night from your perspective? Hayes sighed deeply. I called her in for a private discussion about her conduct. She's a capable officer, but she's been insubordinate. When I confronted her, she snapped. Before I could react, she had my arm twisted hard. I heard a crack. I collapsed. The lawyer nodded sympathetically. Did you at any point attempt to strike her? Hayes's jaw tightened. Absolutely not. Reed rose slowly from his chair. Colonel, were you drinking that night? Hayes's eyes flickered. Excuse me? It's a simple question. Were you drinking? I had a glass of bourbon earlier that evening, yes. But that has nothing to do with this. Reed interrupted. How many glasses? The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed it. Hayes's voice grew sharper. 2, maybe 3. I was off duty. So you were under the influence when you summoned Captain Carter to your office? I was in full control of my faculties, Hayes snapped. Reed stepped closer. And did you raise your hand toward her? No. Then how did your arm break at an angle consistent with resistance? Hayes's nostrils flared. Because she attacked me. Or because she blocked you? Reed asked calmly. Hayes glared at him, trembling with restrained rage. You weren't there. Reed leaned in slightly. Neither were you, Colonel. Not fully. The courtroom was buzzing. The balance was shifting, slowly but visibly. Then Reed said, Your Honor, the defense calls Private Lisa Torres to the stand. The crowd murmured. Hayes's face drained of color. The young nurse stepped forward nervously, clutching her notes. She looked terrified, but resolute. Private Torres, Reed said gently, you were on duty at the infirmary the night of the incident? Yes, sir. Did you see the colonel that evening before the altercation? Yes, sir. Around 1900 hours. I brought him his prescription and saw a half-empty bottle of bourbon on his desk. A sharp whisper spread through the courtroom. Hayes's lawyer jumped up. Objection, hearsay. She's testifying to her direct observation, Reed countered. The judge nodded. Overruled, continue. Torres swallowed hard. He was angry, talking to himself. He said something like, she'll earn respect tonight. I didn't understand what he meant. I left right after. The entire courtroom froze. Hayes slammed his fist on the table. Lies, he shouted. She's lying. The judge's gavel struck. Order. But the damage was done. Hayes's outburst only reinforced the image of his temper. After a brief recess, the judge returned, expression unreadable. The evidence presented raises serious doubt about the colonel's account. The investigation will continue under military oversight, but pending further review, Captain Carter is to be released from custody immediately. Emily closed her eyes, exhaling for the first time in days. Hayes, meanwhile, sat trembling with rage, whispering through clenched teeth, This isn't over. That night, Fort Bragg was quiet again. Emily walked alone past the training fields where her soldiers once drilled under her command. The moonlight glinted off the metal rails and empty bleachers. She paused, staring out into the darkness. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the relief. Major Reed approached from behind. You did well in there, he said. She turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. I just told the truth. He nodded. Sometimes that's the hardest battle to win. She looked back at the field. What happens now? The inquiry continues. Hayes still holds his rank, for now. But the higher-ups are watching. If he retaliates, it'll destroy him. Emily's gaze hardened. He won't stop until he does. Reed nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. Back in his quarters, Hayes sat alone in the dark, a half-empty glass beside him. His pride burned more painfully than his arm. He had built his life on control, on fear, and now a single act of defiance had cracked the foundation. He picked up his phone and dialed. "This isn't over," he muttered to the voice on the other end. "If the army won't take her down, I will." And miles away, Emily sat awake in her bunk, her thoughts restless. She wasn't celebrating. She couldn't. She knew men like Hayes didn't surrender. They plotted. But she also knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced power, corruption, and humiliation, and stood tall. Tomorrow, she would face the world again, as a soldier who refused to bow to fear. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to whisper into the quiet night, "I'm still standing." The silence in Fort Bragg didn't last long. Within days of the court ruling, whispers began to stir through the base. Strange rumors about Captain Emily Carter. Stories of recklessness, poor leadership, and emotional instability started spreading through the ranks. None of them were true, but everyone knew who was behind it. Colonel Richard Hayes had friends, powerful ones, men who owed him favors. Emily arrived at the training yard one morning to find her unit reassigned without notice. Her name had been quietly removed from the command roster. "Orders from above," one clerk muttered awkwardly when she asked. "Above who?" She pressed. The clerk only shook his head. "You didn't hear it from me, Captain." The words burned. Hayes was still pulling strings, even after everything. Major Reed called her that evening. "I warned you he wouldn't stop," he said over the phone. "I thought the investigation would keep him in check." Reed's voice was heavy. "He's clever. He's turning public opinion before the truth can catch up. But don't worry, we'll handle this carefully." Emily sighed. "I'm tired of being careful, Alan." The next day, a new officer approached her during training, Major Daniel Price, sent to oversee field discipline. His tone was sharp, almost mocking. "I heard you've got quite a temper, Captain," he said with a smirk. Emily didn't rise to the bait. "I follow orders, Major, when they're lawful." Price laughed. "That's good. Let's hope you remember that." Something in his tone made her stomach tighten. She realized Hayes wasn't just spreading rumors. He was building a trap. That night, she returned to her quarters and found her door slightly open. Her instincts flared instantly. She stepped inside quietly. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. Her locker was open. Inside, her service pistol was missing. Her pulse quickened. Within minutes, she reported the theft to the security desk, but the officer on duty seemed strangely uninterested. "Probably misplaced it," he said lazily, jotting down notes without looking up. Emily's gut told her something worse was coming. 2 days later, military police appeared at her door. "Captain Emily Carter," one announced, "you're under investigation for a missing firearm from restricted storage." Her stomach dropped. "That's not true. I reported that 2 days ago." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions at HQ," the officer said coldly. She knew what this was. A setup. Hayes was planting evidence. At the station, they questioned her for hours, twisting her words, trying to catch her off guard. But Emily stayed calm. "You already know the weapon was stolen. You just don't want to admit who took it." When they released her that evening, she walked out into the cold, determined not to let him win. She went straight to Reed's office. Reed listened quietly as she laid it all out. He leaned back, frowning. "If he's gone this far, it means he's desperate. That's dangerous." Emily nodded. "Then we need proof, real proof." Reed hesitated, then said, "There's one person who might help us, Private Torres. She's been transferred to the records department. She might have seen something." They met Torres the next day at a coffee shop outside the base. The young nurse looked terrified, glancing around before speaking. "Sir, Captain," she whispered, "I think the colonel's been deleting reports from the internal system, things about the night of the incident. I saw his login credentials used after hours." Emily leaned forward. "Can you prove it?" "I can try. But if I'm caught?" Reed placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We'll protect you." That night, Torres sneaked into the archive room and downloaded copies of Hayes's access logs. They revealed a pattern: unauthorized deletions, falsified documents, even a missing audio recording from the security cameras outside Hayes's office the night of the attack. It was the break they needed. But Hayes wasn't idle. When he learned the investigation had stalled, he grew darker. He started watching Emily again, following her around the base under the guise of supervision. Once, she caught him waiting near the firing range. "Captain," he said smoothly, "I heard you lost your weapon." Sloppy. Emily met his gaze without flinching. "You taught me well, sir. Always watch for snakes." His jaw tightened. "Careful, Carter. You may have won sympathy in court, but I own this place." "Not for long," she said quietly. The tension reached its peak one night when Emily was called for an urgent meeting in the old operations wing, the same one where everything had started. The corridors were dark, nearly deserted. When she entered the room, she froze. Hayes was there, alone. "Colonel," she said sharply, "where's the rest of the team?" He smiled thinly. "No team. Just you and me. Like before." Emily's instincts screamed at her to leave, but he blocked the exit. "You ruined my name," he said, stepping closer. "You made me a joke. Do you have any idea what that does to a man who's given his life to this uniform?" "You did that yourself," she said. "You crossed the line." He laughed bitterly. "You think the Army cares about your version of truth? They'll protect me. They always have." She took a step back. "If you touch me again, I swear." He lunged forward. But this time, Emily was ready. She twisted his wrist, forcing him down in a controlled, precise maneuver. He struggled, trying to break free, but she had leverage. "Stop," she shouted. "It's over." Hayes reached for something, and Emily saw the glint of metal. Her missing sidearm. In that instant, time slowed. Her training took over. She kicked the weapon from his hand, sending it skidding across the floor. Security officers burst in at that exact moment, led by Major Reed, who had tracked her phone's location when she hadn't returned from the meeting. "Hands up!" the guards yelled. Hayes froze, panting, caught mid-motion. Reed picked up the gun. "This is Captain Carter's missing weapon," he said coldly. "You are trying to frame her again." Hayes's face went pale. "You can't prove." Reed held up a tablet. "Actually, we can. Private Torres copied your access logs. The deleted files, the missing reports, all traced to your credentials." Hayes's composure shattered. "You think this will save her?" "You'll never." But the guard seized him before he could finish. Hours later, the base was quiet again. Hayes was in custody, facing charges of evidence tampering, false testimony, and attempted assault. Torres was placed under protection, and Reed filed an immediate report to the Pentagon. Emily sat alone on a bench outside the base hospital, the night wind brushing her face. For the first time, she felt the true weight of what had just happened. Not just victory, but survival. Reed joined her silently, handing her a coffee. "Justice moves slowly," he said, "but it moves." Emily looked out into the night. "He won't stop, will he?" "Not from a cell, he won't," Reed said. She smiled faintly, exhaustion in her eyes. "I didn't break him, Alan. He broke himself." He nodded. That's what power does when it's built on fear. At sunrise, Emily walked across the parade field, the first rays of light cutting through the mist. Soldiers were assembling for morning drills, and a few turned to look at her, not with suspicion anymore, but respect. She had faced down corruption, humiliation, and danger, and she was still standing. In the end, she hadn't just defended herself. She had defended what the uniform was supposed to stand for: honor, integrity, courage. And as the bugle sounded across the field, Captain Emily Carter stood tall, knowing her fight wasn't just for her name. It was for every soldier who'd ever been told to stay silent. Weeks had passed since the explosive confrontation in the operations wing. The atmosphere at Fort Bragg was tense but shifting. The court-martial had begun, and for the first time in decades, whispers of accountability ran louder than the echoes of rank. Captain Emily Carter arrived early that morning, walking across the parade field with the steady, deliberate steps of a soldier who had already survived a war within the walls of the military itself. Her uniform was immaculate, her medals catching the sunlight. She entered the courtroom, now packed with officers, legal teams, and observers. Even reporters with clearance had gathered outside, awaiting word. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a message to the entire military system. No one, not even a colonel, was above the law. Colonel Hayes appeared, escorted by military police. His arm still in a sling, his pride bruised more than his body, he walked with a rigid stiffness. Every step seemed to echo the weight of his arrogance colliding with reality. The judge, Brigadier General Monroe, called the court to order. This session will determine the outcome of multiple charges against Colonel Richard Hayes, including evidence tampering, false testimony, an attempted assault of Captain Emily Carter. The prosecution opened with a sharp, well-researched case. Logs from the base archives were displayed on screens, unauthorized deletions, falsified reports, and audio timestamps showing Hayes's movements. The court listened intently as Private Lisa Torres's testimony was read aloud, detailing Hayes's actions and providing irrefutable evidence that the colonel had attempted to manipulate the case. Emily watched quietly. Her eyes never left Hayes, who sat fuming but silent, knowing every word eroded the foundation of the authority he had spent decades building. The defense tried desperately to salvage Hayes's image, painting him as a victim of circumstance, claiming his actions had been misinterpreted. He was frustrated, yes, but he acted with discipline, the defense attorney argued, pacing with practiced confidence. Monroe's eyes narrowed. Frustration does not excuse obstruction of justice or assault, he said firmly. When Emily took the stand, it wasn't to defend herself. The evidence already spoke for her. She calmly recounted the timeline of events, the calls from Hayes, the private confrontation, the attempted strike, and the defensive maneuver that had broken his arm. Every word was measured, every gesture precise. The courtroom remained silent. Even those inclined to favor Hayes felt the weight of her honesty, the clarity of her moral compass. After hours of testimony, the court took a brief recess. Outside, Emily walked alone through the courtyard, the autumn sun filtering through the trees. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had faced intimidation, false charges, and near personal ruin, yet she remained resolute. She understood now that courage wasn't just about facing a superior in combat. It was about facing a system that could be unjust and refusing to compromise your integrity in the process. Major Reed joined her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Tomorrow it ends," he said quietly. She nodded. "For both of us." The next day, the final arguments were made. The prosecution summarized the facts, emphasizing the irrefutable proof of Hayes's misconduct. "This isn't about rank or ego or tradition," the lead attorney said. "This is about accountability. If we allow him to escape justice, we fail not only Captain Carter, but every soldier who looks up to the uniform with respect and trust." The defense tried once more to frame Emily as the aggressor. But the evidence, logs, testimonies, and recordings left no room for doubt. Even the judge's stoic expression betrayed the disbelief at Hayes's audacity. Finally, the judge spoke. The court has reviewed the evidence, testimonies, and circumstances surrounding this case. Colonel Richard Hayes is hereby found guilty of attempted assault, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. A hush fell over the room. Hayes's face turned pale. His lips trembled, trying to form words, but none came. For once, the man who had commanded obedience with fear was powerless. Sentencing will be determined by the board, the judge continued, but Colonel Hayes is immediately suspended from duty pending further action. Captain Emily Carter's record remains unblemished. Emily exhaled quietly, relief washing over her. But there was no celebration, only the quiet satisfaction of justice fulfilled. Outside, the base seemed lighter somehow. Soldiers whispered, their eyes filled with admiration, respect, and hope. Emily's story had become a symbol, a testament to courage, resilience, and integrity. Later, Emily returned to the training yard. Her unit was reassembled, eager faces looking to her for leadership once again. "Captain," Sergeant Vega said quietly, "we've all been following. You did it. You made them listen." Emily smiled faintly. "We all did. Courage isn't just one person's fight. It's everyone who stands for what's right, even when the odds are against you." Her platoon trained under her guidance, more unified than ever. Soldiers moved with precision, their trust in her leadership absolute. Hayes's shadow had been lifted. As the weeks passed, Hayes's formal dismissal was finalized. Charges were confirmed, and the story of his misconduct spread through official channels. Military investigators reviewed base operations, ensuring that no other officer could replicate such abuse of power. Emily, meanwhile, received commendations, not for heroics in battle, but for moral courage, for standing up against corruption, for embodying the principles the Army claimed to uphold. The base held a quiet ceremony. Emily stood at attention, the wind tugging at her uniform, the medals on her chest gleaming in the sunlight. The soldiers around her saluted with pride, their respect genuine and heartfelt. Later, in a quiet moment, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. The colonel who tried to strike her, the courtroom battles, the threats, lies, and manipulations. She thought of Private Torres, the soldiers who risked whispering the truth, and the justice system that, against the odds, had recognized right from wrong. She realized then that courage wasn't about never facing fear. It was about choosing to act rightly, even when fear, politics, and power tried to stop you. Emily whispered softly to herself, "I stood. I fought. I survived. And I did it without losing who I am." The final chapter of the saga unfolded quietly yet powerfully. Hayes was gone from the base, stripped of rank, and facing the consequences of years of unchecked pride and arrogance. Emily remained, not because she had survived, but because she had proven that integrity, courage, and resilience could withstand even the most oppressive force. Her story spread beyond Fort Bragg, inspiring soldiers across the country. It was a tale not of violence, but of justice. Not of revenge, but of standing firm. Not of fear, but of honor. And as Emily walked across the parade field, one last time before returning to active duty, the wind tugged gently at her hair. The sun illuminated the horizon. And she knew, with a quiet certainty, that she had not only defended herself, she had defended the soul of every soldier who ever looked to the uniform and the values it represented. For Captain Emily Carter, the fight had ended, and in doing so, she had changed the rules forever.